Hello, Nick. How's it going? Da-da-dum. Hey, see ya! See ya! See ya! Let's see. Do we have everyone for this Work in Progress Wednesday? Let's have a look. Yes, seems like we do. Okay. Are the opening shots from your village? Yes, they are. They are. I've been slowly updating all the images that I'm using for my stream, so getting there. Getting there. I've been let me switch up. What are we doing here? Good Wednesday. Focus on the camera. Does this one still work? Okay, still works. Look like paintings out of a museum. Oh, thanks. And this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. Nearly done. Fucking list. This is my second list, by the way. So, oh, chat box works. Why is it offset? Oh. Okay, that's a good sign. I'm just going to ignore it. Pretend that it's all working fine. Yeah. Oh. So many assets. So many things. But, the good news is, so these 3 pages that I just showed you, they're the ones from all the modules, like all the modular pieces that I'm working on. We're making really good progress. I think we have 2 of them done. Almost. And then 1 is like literally all the roof pieces. So yes, we're getting there. My list is a bunch of various sticky notes. Oh yeah, I still have those here too. I have like a stack of sticky notes. Page of roof pieces. Yes. Yeah. So, because I have like multiple different dimensions, right? So I have roofs for 1 meter, roofs for 2 meter, roofs for 4 meter, roofs for 6 meter. And then I have different material variations as well. So I have like tiled roofs, I have thatched roofs, I have like a bunch of different roofs. So kind of going mental. But that being said, making good progress. I'm adding a bunch of details to like all the pieces, so I'm actually really happy with how stuff is going so far. So yeah, let me actually wanna I should really start making lists. Do you mind giving us a closer look at your layout? Oh, Brandom, a layout from my list? Like what the it's very simple. Wait, so it started with this list first, right? So this is my first list. And I don't know if you can tell. You know, I'm gonna keep it up to the camera. Let's see. Ah, the light is just blinding everything. Let's do something like this instead. And see. Yeah. So we have block out, detailed, textures, materials, vertex, color, polish, and LODs. Right? That was my first checklist. And I was like, nah, I don't really care about all those different steps. So now it is literally block out, detailed, polished, and verified. That's it. So that's the new list. And then you can see that some of them are green because they're not referenced by anything. and then some of them are deleted because they were just no longer used, so they have like a little X next to it. But yeah, trying to stay organized. Sometimes I struggle with overcomplicating things like that. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, that's also why I had this list at first, which had like too much stuff on it. And then I was like, nah, I don't care about like all the different steps, because usually what happens is whenever you do a step, it includes multiple checkboxes, right? So just pushing it into like one checkbox. And like with this, it's literally most of the stuff was already in blockout anyway, so that was an automatic checkbox. Detailed is where I did like a secondary pass on it. Polished is where I added like all the little decals and little details and all that stuff on top of it. And then verified basically means that I did LODs, that the materials are correct, and you know, that we have no Z fighting and that it works, basically. So yeah. Yes, enough boring list stuff. Let's have a look. I also need to set this to live chat, and I can see everything. Where were you when Tim was working on his market stalls? No, I gotta ask people where they were, like when I was first doing my Twitch streams, you know? Like, that's a real callback. 3 years ago. Oh, so long. In such a long time. Anyway, enough bullshit. Let's go to WIP Wednesday, because that's why we're here. If I... Yeah. Save on my screen. There we go. Not born. Sarah, how dare you? Oh, my chat box is working. Why wasn't it working yesterday? Ah. Okay. Then let's have a look. I'm also going to be looking at Discord to see if there's like some additional context that I need. So whenever you see me looking up, I'm just looking at my screen and Discord. First, we're gonna start off with Brandom over here, because I'm kind of trying to go in sequence of the Discord this time. Well, let's have a look. Okay, so first, let me introduce you to the concept of WIP Wednesday. This is basically where I look at the work that the community is producing, and whenever they want feedback, they can just add a little WIP Wednesday review, and I'll review it every Wednesday, just to get you some like feedback on whatever you're struggling with. Yeah, so Brandom was asking for feedback on the modeling and the wireframe at this stage. Okay. Okay, let's have a look. Just having a look at like all the rounded spaces, right? Because sometimes what happens is you have, for example, this rounded part has like a lot of geo to make it feel round, right? But then something like this, like the main headphone part, which is like way bigger, right? In terms of like actual asset size, is probably going to have like less density than this actual part, right? Which I don't think you necessarily need. You're not really struggling from like the viewpoints that I can tell, at least, with like any geo, really. But that probably means that you can like optimize this one, right? Because basically the way that I kind of look at topology is the overall consistency of the topology, right? So having, or like the overall density is probably a better word. So if you have a shape like this that has like a certain amount of polys, that probably means that you can get away with like way less polys. Like you could probably remove like every second like edge here and still be fine with the whole thing. Well, every edge here, right? Just to make sure. You could still be fine with that as well. There are some spaces where you're doing a nice bit of optimization, right? So you have this shape. You could probably do the same thing with all these spots, right? But you kind of have them disappear, and then you don't need. God, this is going to be a color mess. Let me take purple or something like that. And then you can remove like all the underlying edges, right? Because you're basically collapsing them, making them disappear. You can apply that same kind of thinking, because if you have like an edge that kind of goes like all the way through like an object, but you don't really need any of that geometry because it's not actually changing anything to the silhouette, you can just remove it, right? So you can just make it disappear in here, and then have like the purple lines are the ones which you want to remove, right? And you can basically apply the same sort of thinking throughout the entire model, right? Whenever something is flat and doesn't need like any geometric detail to change the silhouette, you can just get rid of it. For example, all this stuff, right? Which is basically a cube. Yeah, you can basically get rid of like all the geometry on these parts, because it doesn't actually add anything to the shape itself. Some of them are really clean. This section, this whole plate, you know? Very clean. So yeah. That's what I would say about the topology, right? Is that there's still like optimizations that can be made. And then let's have a here at the Discord. The modeling and the wireframe. Let's have a look. I'm just having a look at like the model itself. And then the way that all this stuff looks, right? Something that would be really nice and adds like material variation is having the tape where it has like a slight sculpted layer, right? Where we can feel like these folds that are like very typical to like a tape, right? I would love to see those too. Obviously not in the low poly, right? But when you start baking it down and over here, like it feels a bit flat. And it feels too chunky and too thick. And that could definitely be like a win there. I would also make sure that whenever you're doing a bake, right? If this is like baked down, emphasize the bevels more. The reason why I'm saying that is because, for example, this top edge, I know that it has a bevel, but like the bevel at this distance is already like barely visible. And it makes it look like there's no bevel there. So that means that in the high poly, you just have to like make the bevel just a little bit bigger. so that the bevel gets retained over a longer distance, which is gonna make it catch highlights and is gonna look just way better when it comes to the presentation of your asset. And this can be applied to most of the edges, right? I would say that this one really stands out to me currently as not being round enough. But probably these guys as well. Let's see. Stuff is really cool. There's a modeling where you have like the wires coming out, and there's like a little bit of tape that holds them together, and then they fray out again. That's really cool. Again, something that you can implement as well is just doing like a slight sculpting pass on it, right? Be very interesting. Same here. Like, those things are really nice to incorporate. I think honestly, like a little lip here that's missing. I think what I was gonna say is that honestly, I don't really mind the modeling as much, right? It's just the texturing at the moment, which is making it really hard to look at, because it's like kind of in an in-between stage, right? And the texturing can definitely use like a lot of love still. But yeah, I think just in general, and this is something that I bring up quite a lot, right? Especially if you're looking at certain diagrams like this. Try to add like little bits of character into it, right? And what I mean with character is like slightly skewing like certain insets, or let's say this USB stick, right? Like just slightly slant it. Instead of having it straight in the socket, maybe it's slightly slanted. Let's see, what could be like another example? These are buttons, right? Like a button can be like slightly crooked, slightly misaligned. Just giving everything like a little bit of a nudge and like a little bit of an imperfection can add a lot of perceived detail to an object as well. In the high poly. Yeah, I think that's a thing that's gonna come up with someone else in this session as well. Is how do you get rid of like the 3D feel? Adding character, and slight misalignments is gonna really help with that. Hey Tobias, hey Henrik, how are you both doing? Welcome to the chat. It's great to see you both here. Yeah, definitely paying attention to all those things. Yeah, there's like some things are still missing, right? So for example, this entire section kind of missing. So yeah, I would say a little bit of a recap here, right? Number one is attention to detail. Like really focusing on like the stuff that's still missing, or the stuff that like the little things really make, like the little details like this really make an object shine, right? So really pay attention to like all the little bits. And this is like a really dense prop, right? So people are gonna be really like paying attention to like all the little bits of detail on the prop itself. So you gotta pay attention to it too. Because most of it is there, right? Like honestly, this is looking really good already. It's just those tiny little things that you need to push yourself in. So attention to detail. Number two is, oh yeah, the bevels. Bevel size, right? That's one that's really important. Really important. Might also be a little bit of a lighting issue. Sometimes it's pretty tricky to see, but like most of the bevels are actually pretty good. Yeah, like again, like details, right? Like where does that connect to? Like where's the hole for that? How does that connect? Very important. And then level 3. Part 3 is character, right? Just adding character to your prop by like slightly misaligning things and like adding little bits of crookedness into your props. I think those were the 3 things that I wanted to bring up here. Yeah, very interesting choice of prop, Brandom. So I'm wishing you the best of luck, because it is a very dense, a very detail heavy prop. So yeah, like I said before, this prop attracted you because of its detail, right? So people are going to be looking at the detail as well. So make sure that everything is there. Wonderful, thank you so much. I will show closer shots with higher resolution next time. The tape has more detail and substance, but it's hard to see. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't, like, this feels like just like a very standard material, right? Like even if you're paying attention to like all the details, right? Like even have like a little bit of like a jagged edge, right? So for example, a part of the prop, a part of the tape still is around the edge, but then a part of it also comes loose, right? Stuff like that makes like a huge difference, because yeah, that's what you want to see, right? And you can't make everything in your texturing. Sometimes you have to add supporting geometry as well to make sure that it comes alive. Yeah. Yeah. Actually manipulate the geo a bit. Yeah. Because the thing, how would I explain this? So the thing is, you can only go so far with textures, right? You can fake a lot of stuff in a texture when it's like a flat piece of geometry, right? So for example, if the tape, let's imagine the tape being here, right? You could do everything in your texture. However, because this is like on the edge and people are going to pay attention to like how it wraps around like the little remote and all that stuff, you have to support things with geometry. Because the texture is only going to get you so far, right? Because like if I erase like what I did, right? This sharp edge doesn't convince me as a piece of tape. It feels more like it's like a little bit of like a metal plate that's just like slapped on there, you know? It feels really weird when a piece of tape doesn't have like those little folds, especially especially if it's like double wrapped over itself, you're gonna see some distortion in the surface, right? And this is the thing, right? It goes back to like number one here. It's like that attention to detail. That's what people are gonna be looking for. So yeah, make sure that everything is in there, because people are gonna know. Get to work. That sounds awesome, Brandom. Good luck. I'm looking forward to seeing this in the future, buddy. This is already looking really complex when it comes to the modeling, so keep pushing it. Keep pushing it. Okay, cool. Next one up is Harley G. Let's see. Harley G is making a Roman style tile for the current layout. I'm looking for feedback regarding the colors and values, and also suggestions on making better grass. Okay. That's an interesting one, especially the grass side of things, because it depends on how you're gonna support it, right? And also what kind of style you're gonna go for too. Let's see. Oh, okay. But at the very least, I wanted to go somewhere towards like a more hand-painted look, with some Photoshop brush on top of it. Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's start with the grass, right? So I think for the grass, what you have to do is like make interesting looking like patterns, right? The pattern itself depends on what you want to do, as in what you want to achieve style wise, right? Because you could go for like something that's like pretty flat. You could also have something that's like a little bit more comical. You could go for like, you have so many different ways of like rendering a piece of grass, right? So try to experiment with the shape of the grass first, and then also think about where the grass would come up from, right? You currently have it growing like in between the tiles, which makes sense, but probably what I would want to see with a little bit of grass is that you have like a little bit of dirt around it too, so that you could make sense of why the grass is growing there, right? Because currently the dirt doesn't really feel like dirt. It feels more like there's like mortar or something cement like in between the tiles, which is maybe what you intended, but that doesn't really work with the combination of grass, right? Oh, also, I just want to give another reminder for people in the chat. First of all, thanks so much for being here. But second, whenever I give feedback, feel free to pitch in with your own ideas too. The more that you help, or the more that we together like help other people grow, the better people's work is gonna get, right? So yeah, feel free to pitch in the chat if you want to. So first is the shape of the grass, right? Like experiment with more shapes. And I would then say try to embed the grass more into like a dirt layer, right? Because it's kind of missing that. What my approach would probably be is I would try to pick like a couple of spots where the tile is probably like a bit more separated, so that you can kind of make sense that there's like potential for more grass to grow there, right? And like pick a couple of spots. For example, let's have a bit of grass here. Maybe have like a little bit of grass here, a bit of grass. And picking like a couple of spots like this is going to make sure that we're kind of clustering things together. Then what you could also do in terms of the shape and your grass clusters, right? Because we're not really making single strands of grass that kind of stick out. You could potentially also look into like a cluster, right? So that you have like a little bit of grass sticking out like that instead. Right? And you would basically take one of these shapes and do them in shit, I forgot the node name, but it's something with radial. I'm sure people in the chat will know what I'm talking about. Radial or spiral or something like that. It's basically a node that takes a shape and it does like a spiral modifier, so you can basically make a tuft of grass and then use that instead of like the singular bits and replace them with that, right? Because it gives it more like a rounded feel. It doesn't have to be 100% 100% like 360, you know? You could also have like a tuft that is just half. And then based on the rotation, you get like really interesting shapes. If you add a very brown dirt, the tiling might become more obvious. Yes, exactly, McFall. That's why you probably don't want to go for like something really brown, but something that kind of still fits the color palette while adding the logical component back in, right? Because you're obviously 100% right that you don't want to like overdo it. So 100% right. What I will say about the colors, and if you're going for like a more hand-painted kind of look, right? Be a little bit more bold with the colors that you use. There is a person. There's a person out there. Who's doing like really interesting, like Mediterranean style environments that kind of go into like the very painterly look. Yeah, but I'm probably not gonna find him here. I'm not gonna find that here. I can't remember the name. Let's have a quick look through my likes. Is that still a thing? Yeah, likes. Let me see if I can quickly find it. Nah, I'm not gonna find it. I think his name was something like Acier or something like that. Pretty vague, I know, but never mind. I'm not gonna find it here. Basically what I'm talking about is instead of sticking through like what is like a natural stone, Alieser, that's the one. Thank you so much, Real Tie. Let me look that up. Acier. It's kind of close depending on how you look at it. Oh my god, thank you so much. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, let me bring up some of his stuff because his stuff looks gorgeous. So this is a person that I'm talking about, making this really cool stuff. So I'm just gonna have like a really quick look if we can find something here. Oh. Internet is going really well today. Okay. I guess that's not working. So I'll just take this random image here. So you can see that like here, even though like it's a lot of sand tones, right? Like a lot of sandstone inspired color palette. There are splotches of like slight pinks, slight purples, slight blue hues, right? Which kind of separate it from like just being like stereotypical sandstone. That could be something to like really experiment with. See if I can find something else. Honestly, I'll just link his art station because it's super interesting to check out. Again, thank you so much, Real Ty. Appreciate that. Would have never found that myself. So that kind of transitions us into the colors, right? So experiment more with colors. And because I do like what you have going, right? It kind of has like the hand painted feel where you can kind of see like the splotches. But yeah, apart from experimenting, I think you can push the colors or like the intensity of the colors, right? Because right now it's like kind of like a very subdued color palette. I think you can still push the colors, be like a little bit more intense. And experiment with that a little bit. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. There's some interesting stuff happening in the previous iterations from your base color. Kind of look interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think the grass is definitely going to be helpful, so... Thank you so much for posting your work, Harley. We're gonna jump to the next one, and the next one is Nadia. Where's Nadia? Nadia May. Hey, Bulborb! Let's see. I have an update on my project. Just passed my midterms. Changed the block out. I wanted to share a new version. Okay. I would love feedback on everything you see. Okay. I mean, it's kind of a catch-all. So next time, Nadia, try to be a little bit more specific with what you want feedback on. So this is probably going to be like a little bit short because honestly... Yeah, I'm comparing it to what happened last time, right? So I'm liking what I'm seeing. The stones are a little bit weird, but that's mostly the lighting. I think the lighting might be broken here. Or just like the presentation in Blender is not doing it justice at all. Let's see. I do like where this is going though. Like, I know that you've rearranged the layout a little bit. That was that's really good. Love to see it. But yeah. Otherwise, don't really have that much to add here, you know? First pass on the ruined walls material made in substance? Yeah. I would honestly present this in the engine as soon as possible, because if you in engine ASAP, right? Because what might happen is that if you look at your material inside a Blender and then you start doing a whole bunch of tweaks because you may want to make it look good in Blender, then you'll have to do the same sort of steps again for Unreal. So this is just a general tip out there for everyone. whenever you're trying to do tweaks to something or try to do iterations, try to do it on something that try to do it towards the end result, which is going to be Unreal in this case, right? Because all the changes you do in Blender don't really matter because it's going to be presented in Unreal anyway. So that would be my take there. So get it into the engine ASAP. Very important point. But yeah, iteration looks nice. Keep it going. Keep it going, Nadia. And then we're gonna jump to the next one, which is from Chill Bill. We have a low poly here. Low poly and bake? Question mark? Okay, I'm seeing some weirdness happening. Hey Antonio! How's it going? Let's see. First of all, like, there's like a gap in your geometry here. So there's missing geo. Right? There's literally like a cut in your geometry here. There's also something weird happening with this line here. I honestly have no idea where that line is coming from. The only reason why that might be happening is probably you misclicked like a button and there's probably like a face hidden underneath it or something. Because otherwise I have no idea why that geometry is there. I don't know what it is supporting. Especially because, like, in this section, it literally goes through, like, a poly. So I have no clue where that is coming from. Maybe from the boolean that you did to the other side, but then you didn't clean up the topology? Maybe? But also, just looking at your topology for your low poly, right? We have a section over here, which is like this edge, that doesn't really contribute anything to your silhouette. Even though, like, it would actually be, like, really beneficial to have, like, another edge here to kind of bridge the curve that's happening here. You know, like, this curve can be smoothened out, like, a lot. And you already have geometry here, so why not use it to kind of bridge that gap, right? So this little bit of geometry, if you just move this to this side, which is actually really easy to do. If you select this edge and you press double G in Blender, well, this is in Blender, right? But you have this in any other program. It's called an edge slide, and it just allows you to slide the edge to whichever position that's already existing on the geometry. So in Blender, just press double G, and that can help you just slide it over. And then the only thing you have to do is kind of like push it up a little bit to help fill in the curve, right? Same thing here. Add another poly here. And then just smooth out this curve. Don't be afraid to add a little bit more geometry to it, right? This curve also looks a little weird. Like, it feels like a bump that shouldn't be there. This curve looks nice, you know? Clean curve. Like it. The complexity on this is also pretty interesting in the way that you approached it. What could be very interesting next time is that we see the geometry plus the bake without the wireframe, and then you have just like this one next to it, right? Because now sometimes the wireframe gets in the way of actually looking at the bake. Yeah. Let's have a look. We're also dealing with like a hard edge here. Which is probably not something that you want to see necessarily. So on this prop, right, because you have this lip, it's a perfect excuse to hide the seam in that lip because no one's really gonna look inside of that lip, right? So it could be really nice to put the seam in there and then just like maximize the rest of the space so that you get like a really nice bake for the rest of the rest of the object. Let's see. Oh, Lloyd was also saying like a lot of this. Lloyd was also saying that assisting with the baking perspective, it would be good to get a view of the model with a flat, smooth gray texture and the bake applied to it. Yeah, in a couple of places I noticed the seam as well. Yep. Yeah. So there is a lot that can definitely still improve here. I think it was a good shout to take a step back, focus on the fundamentals, and like really hammer in like the technical details, right? Because you're still running into like a lot of issues with weird stuff happening, right? For example, like this bit of geo missing, some of the stuff that we talked about before. Also, the pattern on the side of the model, I think, is missing a part, at least when I look at jerrycan references. It might be. It's also, the pattern is like really sharp as well. Let's actually have a look, right? Let me look up some references so that we can get an accurate view. Jerrycan. Oh, I see. It's missing the middle section, right? See if we can get close. It's roughly the same. Well, it will have to do. So let's just bring this one in. Right? And this is why reference is important, because now I'm also noticing like a bunch of things that are in need of changing too, right? So ref, no matter which seniority, no matter how much stuff you've done, it's always going to be important, especially for things that you haven't looked at so much, right? If all you do is model jerrycans, yeah, after a certain point you don't really need reference anymore, right? Or maybe they need like way less of it, but yeah. So yeah, let's have a look at the ref, right? First of all, the shape is softer, right? What you have is like, you have the shape, right? Minus the middle part. but you don't really have the bevels. So you just have like a straight bevel and then it merges into the shape. But there's actually like beveling happening on this side too. So soft shape. First of all. Then, very interesting here, like this part looks like it's built as like a separate thing. And then like kind of molded together, right? So I can see where this is coming from. I don't think it's the right choice to have such a big gap, but I can see where your choice is coming from now. Because it's kind of cut apart and then folded, right? But it's not really reflected in any of the normal details, right? Because you normally have like a really nice like indication that this stuff is bent, and it's going to be really nicely reflected in the normals. Also, this part seems like it's bent over the top of this section as well. Kind of like you have, right? Like the core components are there, it's just missing the refinement of it and the attention to detail. Yeah, really looking at the reference and trying to replicate it. It's going to be a key here, because most of it looks good. You can see certain parts where this shape as well, like it kind of goes out, and then the top of where this comes together, like actually aligns with this section here. So you would actually have to move like this entire section until here, and you would have to like simulate the curve here too, right? Now you can see that this section is like nicely round, which in your case, like it definitely has that like little bump in it, which you don't want to have necessarily. But yeah, I'll keep it here. Keep watching the references. Keep paying attention to like all the little things. Thank you so much, McFall, for bringing that up as well. For bringing up the point of always looking at references. Highly appreciate it. But yeah, like really, this is the thing, right? The amount of attention and detail that needs to go into one prop and making that look really good is very important in the beginning. So yeah, good luck. Good luck, Chill Bill. And we're gonna move on straight over to the next one, which is gonna be McFall, I think? Yeah, McFall. Hi, I recently sort of finished an environment, but since I want to make sure it's as good as I can be, I would love some feedback on where I could improve. In my opinion, lighting is probably the weakest part, but I'm not sure how I would improve it currently. Would love general feedback as well. I'm gonna ask a couple of questions here. I'm gonna start out with the first one. It's question time. So, question time. Number 1. Where do you want us to look? Right? Because if we're looking at the overall scene, right? Let's say we focus on the big overall shot, right? What stands out the most are those two areas. Right? This one is kind of irrelevant to what you're working on because it's literally a sign that leads you outside of the environment that you're trying to show off, right? So this one is kind of irrelevant. And this one shows nothing. Right, so we're getting pulled into things, but we're not really getting a payoff, right? So that's one thing to really think about. Like, where do you want us to look? Usually, this also leads to like a second question. What should the focal point be? Right? That kind of leads to like what I was saying before. Like, what do you want people to discover whenever they look at your work? Right? Like, if you're going to be pulling attention to something with lighting, then you better make sure that it's something interesting where people can be like, ah, okay, so this scene is about fill in the blank, right? That leads to story. What's the story here? Right, like all these three, like they should be working in tandem, like in tandem of each other, right? Let me actually take a deep dive here. Because like from looking at the screenshots, we're not really getting reflection into someone's personal life, really, right? Like the closest that we can possibly get is that they love coffee and noodles, which might hint at them being a student, potentially, right? Starbucks and noodles. So I would really think about like what kind of story you want to tell. The story I envisioned was an apartment that was recently moved into, hence the moving box. But that's not really like an impactful story, right? Like who's moving in here? Like that's a thing that's worth telling. If you just have like an apartment where it's like, oh, someone moved in here, that doesn't really sound like an interesting story, right? So you can retain the thing that you wanted to tell, but you just have to make it personal, right? If you just focus on like who is moving into the apartment, that can actually give you like a lot of ideas of like what you need to build to make it their space. More personality items like a boxing bag. Yeah, for example, right? For example. Something that makes it personal. You know, very stereotypical, but write the stuff that's on the boxes and then maybe set dress it with like a couple more assets, right? And I think at that point we established the foundation, right? So the foundation is, let's go. You can make it whatever you want, right? But I'm gonna go with your idea of a boxing bag, right? So the foundation is a boxer that moved apartments. Right? Cool. That's our foundation. Why? Why did they move? Right? Was it forced? Was it by choice? Are they moving in with their partner? Did they get forced out because they got a divorce? You know? Like, hint to why. Maybe he was, if we're going with the cyberpunk thing, right? Like, maybe he was like a former corporate employee who got caught stealing something, so they stripped him of all his valuables and he doesn't have a stable income yet, right? Something like that. Okay, how would you show that off then? Maybe he's still clinging on to like certificates that he had from like corporate school or whatever, but like it's smashed in. Something like that, right? I'm just spitballing here, right? But something deeper, right? Like that hints as to why they needed to move out. Let's really explore that. There's a technique where you just keep asking why until you get to like what you actually want to have at the core, right? So keep asking the why. So for example, if we go with the boxer theme, right? You could tell like a very interesting example that the moving boxes are still there, and he only unpacked like his boxing bag, and it's maybe like in the center of his living space, right? So imagine like one of those, what is that, like boxing bags just hanging here, right? And then the rest of it is still like up in wraps, right? So the only thing that he unpacked is like his boxing gloves, right? So you can see like the boxing gloves like in this cardboard box. And maybe the only thing that you see lying around is like training manuals, right? Like how to become a better boxer. Training manuals. Cool. What else can we do with it? Like maybe there's some dumbbells. Right? Because he's like trying to gain weight. Trying to up his weight as well. And now we're getting to like something that tells more of a story, right? We're giving the idea of like a guy who, for whatever reason, got evicted out or like moved into this apartment, which looks like a little bit run down, but like his sole focus is just like boxing, right? There's actually like a really interesting story in the latest Cyberpunk DLC, which basically talks about like a boxer who got controlled, who was like a former part of a gang, and he got like a special implant to make him better at boxing, but now he lost like a fight, and he thinks it's because of the implant. But then once you talk to the people that have installed the implant on him, like they said that the implant had nothing to do with it, he's just not that good, you know? And it's like, I'm just bringing that up as an example because it hints at like so many different things that could happen in this world, right? Like for example, why is he boxing, right? Like maybe it tries to win something back. Maybe he lost like a tournament. You know, so many things that you can tell here. And then what you could do, right? Because then we have something. I'm kind of building my way back up, right? So we have like number 3 figured out. So number 3 is done. We kind of have a story that we can deal with. What is the focal point? This area, right? Cool. So I'm just gonna move this light over here. I'm just gonna have like a very dramatic lighting that kind of hits like the boxing area, right? With all the trinkets in it, and turn the TV off. That the sole focus becomes like the boxing area and like all the trinkets that you want to have like around it, right? To really highlight the story. Cool. And then where you want us to look, if we then zoom out, imagine all this stuff just lying here, right? So we have like the dumbbells, and we have like maybe a couple more cardboard boxes, maybe a couple dumbbells. Then what's gonna happen, that instead of looking at the TV, we're gonna be looking at the boxing area, right? And now you're looking straight into an apartment of a boxer who, just from looking at the apartment, you can get that like, oh my god, like he didn't even care about like unpacking his stuff. He's just focused on like getting better at boxing. Right? Maybe that's not something that you can or want to implement at this time, but definitely try to think about an environment through a story, because that's what's gonna interest people, right? And it can definitely help with whatever you want to highlight. Hope that makes sense, McFall. I'll give you some time to answer questions as well. I know we kind of went off the rails, right? Because you probably just wanted to get like a little bit of feedback on the lighting. But I think fixing the lighting in this scene wouldn't really help per se. You need something to actually give context to what we're lighting up, right? Because like you got a solid foundation of the scene, right? Like the apartment itself, like it's there. You can add more details to it, but I think it serves as like a really solid foundation of what you wanna tell. You just have to put the story in there. All right. Yep, it makes sense. Thanks. It was a bit bare in terms of story, so I needed to add something more interesting as a highlight. Yeah, and like what I really try to focus on is something that doesn't need a lot of work, right? Just like a boxing bag and maybe opening like one of the boxes and maybe have like a couple of boxing magazines. It's not a lot of work, you know, in terms of like really giving people something to look at. But yeah, boxing was an example, right? It doesn't have to be a boxer. You can do the same sort of technique and just approach it with like anything else, like any other story that you want to tell. All right. We're gonna move on to Ahmed. Welcome to the community, Ahmed. I think you're a new person here. Let me... Oh no, you've been here for a while. I'm struggling with modeling the top part. And how can I create something that doesn't look like 3D? Wait, that doesn't look like 3D? I tried to model the top part, but it doesn't feel right. Like the rest of the model looks so 3D. Yeah, it's what we said before, right? Oh, McFall, I'll get thinking. Thanks a lot. No worries. Yeah, happy to help. So back to you, Ahmed. Have a look. I'm just looking on Discord, but yeah, I mean, the reason why it looks so 3D is because we don't really have any textures to look at, right? Like a simple prop like this, a lot of the stuff that doesn't make it feel 3D is because of textures, right? The textures add like a lot of life to a prop like this. So once you get to the texturing stage, I think you're gonna feel like a little bit more confident with what you have. What you can also do, right, is kind of the thing that I was saying before. Trying to add like a little bit of crookedness inside of the model. A perfect example could be the doors here, right? Well, the doors, I mean the hatches that open. What you could do is make sure that these hatches, like they're like slightly crooked, so they have like a little bit of deformation along the top. Maybe just a one, right, to not make it too obvious, and very slight deformation, right? Just giving it like a slight bump. And then probably also just have like this wheel like rotated toward that side. Right, because now all the wheels are kind of coming out at like the same direction, so just splitting that up could also help. But I think honestly, so let me first add a note here. So a little deformation goes a long way. Yeah. On stuff like this, the textures add a lot of life to it. So don't underestimate how much that textures can do. So just keep going forward. Let me actually see. I think maybe there might also be like a little bit of confusion what the next step is necessarily, right? But like, I'm honestly not sure how much you know about this, right? But like normally what you do with game assets like this is you build a high poly. Okay, so high poly prop, which is usually like HP. Then you build a low poly prop, which is like the lower density version of your high poly, right? Because especially the top part here is like super dense in amount of topology. And then what you do with those two is you combine them. And you bake that down onto the low poly prop. So I'm not sure. I just want to make sure that this is like the workflow that you know is that you're supposed to be doing for game assets, right? I'm just outlining it here. And then once you have that baked prop, that's where you can go into like texturing in Substance Painter, for example. And that's where all the juicy stuff is gonna come in, and you're gonna get like all the nice texture details. So there's probably like a ton of videos out there that talk about the workflow. So I would definitely have a look at this if you're not already familiar with it, and have a look at it first. But yeah, this little tip is definitely gonna help. Just a little bit of deformation can go a long way of making your stuff not look like 3D. But honestly, what I would do is keep all those little deformations at the end of the pipeline. So just make it like a very, very typical bin at first. And then at the end, when you know that your texturing is done and that your baking is done and everything looks good, then potentially like even duplicate your low poly, right? So that you have a backup, and then add just like a little bit of geometry so that you can move it and skew it and kind of add those little imperfections into the prop, because it's way easier to do that afterwards and still have a backup for whenever you want to go back to your high poly or your low poly, right? That you don't have to like now deform it to like the deformations that you've done and rebake it. So keep a backup, but do these little deformations at the end of the pipeline. References and imperfections. Yep. References are super important. I think, yeah, Ahmed has a lot of references, so I think good on that side. But yeah, I think definitely the next step is baking it down. Baking it down and working on the textures. But the modeling, I mean, the modeling looks good. It just is really high poly now, right? So yeah, if we're gonna bake this down to a low poly, like you can get rid of most of these edges and you're gonna have something clean to work with. I think you got a solid base here, honestly. So yeah, but look into the workflow here first. That's gonna be super important. And if you got any more questions, feel free to ask in the community chat as well. And thank you for your post. Gonna move on to AFM. This project is currently working on bayonet modeling. My goal is to achieve a very realistic result. So any suggestions are greatly appreciated. Next time, any suggestions is not really good in terms of asking for feedback, right? So I'm gonna throw a reminder out here. If you're looking for specific feedback, the more specific you make it, the more direct feedback you're gonna get. So for example, you're at the modeling stage, right? Ask for feedback about where you would improve like your high poly, for example, right? And then Danny came in already. Danny gave some really good feedback. So let me bring this up as well for everyone to see. So this is the feedback that Danny gave. So we got a little bit of softening of this edge here to capture more of the highlight, which is definitely on point. Too sharp edges may cause ugly bakes. This is kind of what I said before with someone else's work as well, right? Most of the time what we do when we bake stuff down, we overemphasize the bevels because then the bevel is a little bit bigger and it can capture the light reflecting from it for a longer distance as well. You can add some little dings to add the visual interest in the high poly as well. 100% agree, especially because this seems to be like an older version, right? What you could do what I would personally do is, especially on the blade itself, like all those little cracks, all those little divots, maybe even these insets and like these markings, right? So this inset, this marking, this little inset here, I would honestly sculpt all those details. And add it in the high poly. You can do that stuff in Substance Painter as well. But I feel if you're really going for like maximum quality, you get a better result once you sculpt that in your high poly. Because yeah, Danny is definitely right. You can do a lot with like just yeah, adding little scratches, the little hooks and all that stuff into the high poly as well. One thing that I notice is you've got your shapes the other way around, where the end part here is supposed to be bigger than the blade. Because what happens is the metal at the end probably slides over it and then gets fastened onto the wood, right? So it's a metal cover. And right now the wood is actually bigger than the metal, which doesn't really make sense in terms of like layering of materials, right? Yeah, definitely sculpting these smaller little sections, adding a lot of imperfections to it. And definitely like Danny was saying as well, these kind of highlights need to be improved upon because they're going to be under a lot of scrutiny, right? Because it's actually kind of interesting. This seems to be like the highlight ridge, right? It seems to be going that way. And then what's also super interesting and kind of what Danny was talking about too, is that you have like a variation, which is like pretty typical from like an old blade. You have like a variation in the side, right? So side here is bigger than like the sharp blade here. Details like that are super important to pay attention to. Because now you kind of have like a very pristine version of the blade, but that's probably not what you want to replicate, right? You probably want to replicate it into like the source material that you have. Or like from the source material. So stuff like details like that are going to be really important. Yeah. Henrik is bringing up a good point. Trying to find special details and having a look at the videos, right, on how this stuff was made can actually be like a really cool point of reference. What I also like to do is, first of all, look at the videos. That's good, right? There's also collectors that kind of talk about this stuff too. Videos. Collectors and auctions as well. You can find a lot of really high quality pictures from auctions, especially for like more authentic stuff like this. You can find some really good stuff on auction websites. Yeah, just as a small side tangent. Yeah. This is definitely breaking up the edge, you know, and make it look like old. Making it look old in ZBrush. Probably a pass that you're going to want to do. Especially, again, you're going for high quality detail, so I expect to see that high quality detail in there, right? And then the metal gets deformed by a hammer to stick on the wood. Yep. Yeah, that's probably why this like little groove is in here. There's probably like a bunch of like authentic ways they do that. Yeah. I think in general, you bring up a really good point, Henrik. Just figuring out how something is built is probably my favorite way to really deconstruct an asset, and then I can figure out how to put it together again, right? There's so many references that I use where I'm just looking at like, oh, how does old, especially because I'm working on like a medieval piece myself, right? I'm looking at like a lot of old medieval woodworking blogs, right, where people are trying to replicate old school techniques and like how stuff fit together. Super interesting to see how stuff is deconstructed so that you can then take that knowledge and put that back into your work. But yeah, I think the large part is just put it through ZBrush, you know, add all those nice little edges, break up all the edges, like really put in like the work on all the details, because that's going to look so good. So good. It's probably the main part. And then making sure that like stuff like this doesn't happen, right? Where you understand the logic of like how all these things work together. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of reference, always important. Gonna help you a lot. Okay. Thank you so much for posting your work, AFM. And then I think we're gonna move on to the last one for today, which is gonna be Daniel. Where are we? Daniel. There we go. Oh, I don't think I've sorted out your layout yet. Just do that real quick. I have no idea why these pictures are like bigger than they're supposed to be. But it's just rendered as like, yeah, they're PNGs with like a bit of transparency next to it. No idea why. And boom, just fill up the back of it. Okay, Daniel, let's have a look. I would love to get feedback on the composition, possible mistakes that you find distracting, and missing features and details. Okay. Okay. So we got like a bunch of images here, right? Which is probably the first thing that I would say. Like some of them are pretty interesting, right? Like some of them have potential. For example, the shot that we have here. Where's it? This shot? God, so annoying. Okay. This shot has something interesting going for it, I feel. The foreground is a little bit too dark though. I love what you're trying to do with it, but I think what you can do instead is have the rocks be brighter and then look into like depth of field instead. Especially because you have a lot of stuff that's close to the camera. Using depth of field is going to make it so that like everything close to the camera is going to be blurry, right? So that's going to be a massive help here. Also, like reveal a little bit more. Right? I would probably have like a cutout somewhere here so that we can see like visually where you're taking us, right? Then also what would be cool is that you can kind of see, you see this part, right? Where you go around the corner and then maybe you come up this side of the road again. Alright, so that we get like a little bit of a spiral structure in the middle, which could be pretty interesting. Because now it kind of goes out and then we don't really see anything. So there's no indication of like, huh? Where am I going? Right? And I think it's the intent that you have something up here, right? And then to really emphasize, I would probably have some larger structure here. And really make it look like this is like a docking station, right? Like it's almost what is it, like a flight navigation tower or something like that. Because this location is cool, but it's a little bit flat when it comes to the telegraphing of what the location is actually supposed to do, right? So something that has, for example, like a structure attached to it, and then maybe there's like a flag or like a bright element on top of the structure to attract like people coming in, right? Because that's probably what you want to do, is have like a signal tower or something like that to attract like the weather balloons coming in. Would be very interesting. But this has potential. I like where this is going. There's some other parts where I gotta say, with those 4 images, I don't really know where I'm supposed to be looking. Right? Like, there are like interesting things potentially happening, but we're not really looking at something interesting. It kind of all feels like pretty generic. It kind of runs into the same issue that the tower is running into too, right? Where the tower is just like pretty generic buildings stacked upon a rock, but they don't telegraph like why the rock is there, why are the balloons flying there, like try to make sure that like stuff has a function, right? This sort of has a function. I like what it's doing here, like a little bit of a market stall. So we're getting like an indication of something here. That could be cool. So we're getting like a little bit of a function here. But yeah, just driving that home, really. Think so you have a lot of concept art. So this is called Ballon Village, right? Which is Balloon Village. Which could be very interesting, and I'm just looking at like your concepts here, right? Which could be interesting, but I think to give it like a unique character, like really think about the logic of things, right? Because there is something here, right? In terms of idea, there is something here. But yeah, like really think about like what's the function of the village then? Also, is the village still active? That's also a big question that I'm actually asking myself. Because if this village is active, then I'm not seeing that much of activity, right? Like all these shots, they kind of look like everything's deserted. But I don't think that's your intent, right? I think your intent is to actually tell a story about like a village that's thriving in the sky, right? Like high up in the mountains. So make sure that you telegraph that, right? Like in terms of like food being available, like where are they getting their water, right? Like maybe there's a fountain, like this fountain still has like water coming down to it, like just indicating that there's still something going on. Could be very interesting. Also, I'm gonna write logic, right? Because I'm gonna talk about it again. So because the function and the logic to me are different, right? So the function of the village is to be like, let's say, self-sustained, up high, trading post, let's say, right? Cool. What is the logic then? What is the logic of this place? So if we're talking about something that's self-sustained, right? Like what kind of tech do they have and how do they support that tech? Where are they getting their water? Where are they getting their food? How do people like sustain themselves when it comes to like clothing? They probably get it delivered in, right? Because they're a trading post. They're probably going to have like an active trade going on with the nearby villages. But I think honestly, like food and water are super interesting to always explore, because if we really think about it, right? High up in the mountains, you don't have a well, because a well doesn't make sense, right? Because you're building high up in the air, let's say 2,000 meters, right? So that means that if you want to get to like some water, you probably have to dig down like 2,000 meters as well, because the water is probably not going to be contained in like a rock formation, right? So a well doesn't generally make sense. Same for the fountain, right? So what you would almost need to be looking for is like a spring of some kinds, right? Like a natural spring, like high up in the hills. Maybe because they're high up in the hills, maybe they live off snow, right? And they use the snow to melt that down to get water. So like a spring or ice or something that makes sense. Yeah, catching rain or water from the clouds when the clouds hit the mountains. Super cool idea. And they could have like all of these, right? But that's what I mean with the logic of this place. Like this place, super illogical to have like a fountain there. Like a fountain to me is more something that you build to showcase that you have like a successful, thriving village. But you can't have a mountain next to a wooden shack because that just doesn't look like it's like a thriving city, right? So they kind of clash in terms of like their purpose and their logic again, right? Oh shit. No. First one's water. Second one is food. Where did they get food? Right? Have they become proficient in hunting birds? Is there like a species of animals that lives high up in the mountains, like mountain goats? You know, I think, etc. Right? Like, but showcasing that is actually going to be pretty interesting because that adds. What you're trying to do with all these things, right, is the logic is your anchor to the believability of your world. And the more logic and the more you can like attach it to the real world, right, the more you build that foundation, the more freedom you give yourself to then add things on top of it, which are like a little bit more unique. But we need a foundation, like we as in like people, we need a foundation into something that we can believe in before we then take a leap into something that might be like a little bit more far-fetched, right? Yeah. I would definitely look at that first. Then thinking about the composition of these 4 shots, right? Again, the first question is active, right? Is a very big one first. Second one is like what are we focusing on? Like what are you trying to show us, right? What are we seeing? Because let's say if this is like an active town, right? Let's do like a rejig, right? So this is now gonna be like a section where people have like raised beds full of like crops, right? That they're growing. So they have like crops growing here. Let's see, like there's firewood on the floor, but I haven't seen a single tree. Again, self-sustained, right? Okay, so lots of plant beds because they need to grow crops for their foods, right? So that's going to be like a very prevalent thing. Are we talking about medieval times or current times? Right? Maybe they can use solar energy in some sort of way, where maybe they figured out like an alternative timeline thing where they have like solar panels, but like, I don't know, way earlier than we were expecting, right? Or they harvest the power of the wind or something like that. But then we're actually looking at something that starts to come together, right? And then giving the functionality to it, to like each building, where you say like, okay, cool. So this is the main trading hub, right? So because this looks like it, if we're still talking about like a trading post, right? Like it's like a lot of visitors and like traders coming over. I would expect the biggest building here to be like the main trade hub, where we see like a lot of people coming in, right? So what do you expect at a trade hub? Probably like market stalls around it, right? Cool. That's what we're seeing here. Probably want to expect like a little bit more. And then do the same thing. Give these other places also an identity, right? So for example, this could be like one of the farms. Right, so you will probably see like a lot of farming equipment, maybe like another shed next to it with like a lot of farming equipment. There's like all kinds of stuff growing up here. Right, and then this could be, I don't know, instead of the farms here, right? Because you kind of made it a farm before. Let's make it an archery range. Because how the hell are they going to catch birds if they don't learn how to shoot a bow, right? So, cool. I have an archery range now. Nice, like a ton of bows, right? And now we're actually seeing the purpose of this thing coming alive right in front of us, right? So, you can see that they're like teaching people from like a very young age how to shoot a bow. Then we have a farm because they need some way to like get additional food source in. And we have the main trading hub with like a bunch of market stalls next to it, right? So yeah, you can do a lot here. There's a lot of wins, a lot of cool stuff that you can do. But like make sure that there's some logic and that whatever we're looking at like kind of makes sense for the world that you're trying to build. Like a book writer from a fantasy world creates rules. Yeah, exactly. It's all about not the knowledge, but like the logic of it, right? And you can see like the logic of me trying to set up like, okay, what's the function, right? Self-sustained, up high, the trading post, is it active? Where are they getting their food and water? All that kind of stuff is then poured into assets. Because, right? They hunt birds. Cool. Archery range. Self-sustained. I need a farm. Cool. Trading hub. Obviously, we're gonna have a big building that has like lots of market stalls next to it because people are coming and going constantly. This is a busy trading hub, right? So you can see how I turn like the story that I came up with into actual things that you can then build to visualize that story that you had in your head, right? Yeah. And then doing the same thing here, right? Like maybe if this is a part of the docks, right? Because I think this is the area that we kind of look out from here, if I'm not mistaken. Cool. Awesome. So we have this area here that is close to the dock where people are gonna come in with their ships, right? What makes sense there? Let's make this a freaking repair shop for balloons. So we see like tarps from balloons hanging here. Maybe there's like still a balloon that they're currently testing, right? Maybe there's like multiple tarps and like different kinds of fabrics for balloons. Right, and they have like, let's say like a box of tools next to it. And maybe they also have like little baskets, you know? Like baskets for people to like sit in their airships. You see what I'm doing, right? Like I'm always thinking in the service of the logic of the scene, where it's like, okay, cool. So people are passing by this. Either it could be Henrik, you know, like Henrik is saying, like, or to transport many goods. You could also turn this into like a docking station, right? where people go into the trading post, they buy their goods, and then they go grab a drink or they go chill out and maybe go for a walk or something like that in the nearby mountain range, while someone else loads up their stuff and brings it to like the loading area, right? That could also be a thing. But it's always in service of the logic that you're trying to establish before. Yeah. Keep that in mind. Hi, Padam. Sorry, I was kind of in a heated storytelling thing there, so yeah. This is the thing. Lots of options here, right? Lots of options. You just have to make sure that everything is kind of established to be cohesive. So think about that next time. If you don't do any changes for this one, Daniel, think about that next time, right? Think about like what makes like a cohesive world, and reflect that in your concept as well, right? Think it with that logic in mind. Gotta take care of the inhabitants. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Cool. Thanks, Daniel. McFall is saying also a Starbucks would look nice in the middle of the settlement. Hell yeah. Oh, dude. You know what you could do? Starbucks? Good idea. But can you imagine? Oh, this would actually be pretty cool. If you take a brand that exists now, but then reimagine it like it was in like the Middle Ages or something like that, right? Where you could kind of go like very cliche, right? But you could have like a wooden Starbucks mug that they like kind of obstructed as like a giant sign that's just like in front of the building, you know, to attract people. You could almost have like, you know, like an alternative timeline and really go crazy with that stuff too. Again, you know, like it doesn't have to be like boring when we talk about logic, right? I think that's a good point to bring up. Like you can still have fun with it. But if you then do, let's say if we went with like the really big Starbucks sign, right? Do the same thing for the trading post, you know, like make like a really quirky sign that says like, oh, trade here or whatever, and still keep it all in wood because it's still medieval. You know, you can add like a fantasy spin on it for sure, but it's still driven by like this logic, right? Because underneath it, like we're still used to like seeing the places in connection with each other. Cool, Daniel. Thank you so much. This was really fun to talk about. I really enjoyed that. Gotta remember the Starbucks cup in the last Game of Thrones season. Oh my god, I didn't even watch it. Product placement. The best and believable magic is the magic based on rules. Yeah. It always comes down to the same thing, right? It needs to be something that we as people can latch onto in terms of believability. That's why Avatar are like long blue humans, right? That's why they don't look like really weird space aliens, because that makes them relate to us more. Like we get it because we can kind of see a little bit of ourselves in it, right? Yeah, so keep that in mind. Always try to make things relatable, keep things in context, and add the logic in there, right? Because this would look so good if you add this logic in it. Yeah, because I think that's the core of what's missing. All right, enough said about this, Daniel. I think that was the last one for today as well. So I think this is gonna do it for tonight. I want to thank each and every one of you for putting your work up. Thank you for letting me have a look at it. And I'm gonna post like all the feedback in the community channel tonight, or maybe early tomorrow, depends on if I get to it. and I'll post it with the overpaint and a link to this video as well. And if you wanna enjoy getting feedback live as well, then great question, Henrik. Go to beyondaccent.com, become a member of the community, and yeah, all the information is there. It's basically go to our website, which I'll link to you shortly, and then there's a button right there that takes you to becoming a member through our Patreon as well. And for the people that participated, and also for the people that are new to this, like, you can ask me to give feedback like every week. I do this on a weekly basis. So yeah, even for the people that I talked to today, feel free to re-add the tag for next week. All right, people, I'm out. Have a nice evening. Thanks so much for all being here, and have a nice night. Bye bye. No worries, Brandom. Happy to help.